Now let's talk about how we can add to a list. Lists are expandable. You can add to a list anytime you'd like, and that's going to be the major part of what we do. There's two ways that we can add to a list that we'll look at this week. First is called append. So now if I add or append rather a value to the list, I'm actually expanding the list. As you can see, if I were to print this list, we'd see right away that the list was increased by individual items. You know the word append, of course, because we use it in email all the time. We're adding to the end of the list. Appending means adding to the end. Of course, the list maintains its order and just duly adds each item as we wish. We'll find that a list is like an infinitely expandable accordion. It'll open and open and open, and we can add more and more items to it. Another thing we can do when we're working with lists is also very similar to strings. What would happen if we were to add one list to another? Well, what would you imagine would happen if we had a list like X and we also wanted to add on a list like Y? What do you suppose we would see in Z? Well, what we'll see is the two lists concatenated together. So as you can see, it's also very much like a string, in that a string has characters. We can concatenate these strings together to produce a new string. Lists, on the other hand, don't contain characters, they contain objects, but as we saw, they're very much like a string in that you can slice a list and you can get the len of a list. And the concatenation operator works in exactly the same way. It'll allow us to take two different lists, marry them together, or really concatenate them together into one large list, and then return it as a brand new list. You can see I'm actually wrapping here, but this is supposedly the same list, the one that goes from here to here. That's one big list that's been appended together. Similarly, just for completeness, we should give you a little bit of code for removing items from a list. However, I want to emphasize that this is not what we usually do with a list. We don't normally remove items from a list. Most often, we're going to build up a list and then maybe loop through it or learn some other information about the list. But we don't normally think about destroying a list or removing items from a list. That gets very messy, and it becomes much easier. It is much easier to build up a list rather than try to sculpt a list or remove items from a list. So if I'm interested in removing from a list, I have some choices. One of the things I can do is simply pop an item from the list. Pop will remove an item, and if we look at X again, we're going to see that that item was removed. Oops, there we go. So pop removed an item, and the more, as you continue to pop, it's a little bit like the reverse of append. If you pop an item off, it will remove the item, and X will change accordingly. If we're interested in popping off the beginning, we're going to see the item that got returned, and when we print the list again, we should see that that item has been removed. Remove works very similarly in that you can actually remove a value by name. If we are able to do this, then we should see that the resulting list is sans, meaning without the removed value. But again, please remember, removing from a list is very rare. Normally, we just build up lists. So if you ever wanted to have a list that doesn't contain certain items, Normally what you do is loop through and just selectively add the items that you want to a new list rather than thinking about removing them from the list.